This is an introductory video to the BioEssays 2023 article entitled Evo-devo Beyond Development, Generalizing EvoDevo to All Levels of Phenotypic Evolution. The authors of the article are myself, Isaac Salazar Ciudad, and Hugo Cano Fernandez, both from the Genetics Department of the Autonomous University of Barcelona. I myself, in addition, am from the Center of Mathematical Research in Barcelona. Phenotypic evolution can be described as the movement of a population in a trait space or morphospace over time. Then, there is three main questions one can ask in phenotypic evolution. There is an existence question: does evolution happen and what does it require? There is the rate question: which processes determine its rate? Is it natural selection, drift, linkage to disequilibrium, etc.? And then there is the direction question: what determines the direction in which phenotypes evolve? This is how traits change in relationship to each other and in relationship to themselves. Classical evolutionary theory, that is, most of current evolutionary theory, explains well the existence and rate questions, but not so well, we think, the direction question. The dominant view in the modern synthesis is that natural selection is the main factor determining the direction of phenotypic evolution. Other processes, like drift or mutation, for example, are also considered to affect the evolution and its rates, but without having a major deterministic influence in its direction. But natural selection can only act on existing phenotypic variation. This implies that for natural selection to be the main process determining the direction of evolution, phenotypic variation has to be possible and equally likely in all directions. This is isotropic. If that is not the case, then the factors determining which phenotypic variation is likely and which is not have also a crucial role in determining the direction of phenotypic evolution. This is in fact one of the major tenets of EvoDevo. Morphological variation is not isotropic, and the process of development is the crucial factor determining which morphological variation are likely to occur in each generation and population from mutation. This is the direction of phenotypic variation. Because of its role in determining morphological variation, development is seen in EvoDevo as a major factor determining the direction of morphological evolution. Natural selection will be the other one. In each generation and population, development will propose directions of morphological variation, and natural selection will choose among those. This way, development and natural selection determine together how morphology changes. This is the direction of evolution. This relationship between natural selection and a process constructing a phenotype, development, is not exclusive of morphology, but should apply, we argue, to all phenotypic levels. At phenotypic levels of morphology, there is no development as such, but there are processes that, in analogy with development, construct the phenotype. For example, protein folding for protein structure or learning for behavior. We call the processes constructing the phenotype at each level generative processes. These processes determine the directions of phenotypic variation at each phenotypic level. This is, phenotypic variation is never random or isotropic. For example, the morphology in the left becomes the one in the upper right due to a network of gene interactions that regulate cell signal and cell divisions. The mutation shown in the lower network will give rise to the second morphology, but there is no single mutation that from this network will give rise to the morphology in the bottom. For that morphology to occur, a major restructuring of the network is required, and thus, these three morphologies will never be observed in the same population. In that sense, this generative process determines the relational properties of the possible directions of morphological variation that will occur by mutation in a given population. Since phenotypic variation is never isotropic, explanations about the direction of phenotypic evolution always require two types of arguments: generative arguments about which phenotypic variants can appear, and selective arguments about which of them are going to pass to the next generation. The first type of argument depends on generative processes and what we understand about how they generate phenotypic variation and why. And the second type of arguments depends on natural selection and similar processes like drift. Classical evolutionary theory uses selective arguments, but mostly ignores generative arguments, as we discussed. In the past, we did not understand generative processes well, but nowadays we do, to some extent. So there is no longer an excuse not to use them in evolution and explanations. Considering generative arguments in evolution and explanations has a number of advantages. The first advantage is that generative arguments provide a better and more complete description of the actual processes determining the direction of phenotypic evolution, as we come to discuss. Second, they also provide a better capacity to predict phenotypic evolution. In the article, we detail how is that possible and concrete studies doing so. In brief, if we can mathematically model a generative process to understand which phenotypes it will generate from mutation, then we can know which are the possible directions of phenotypic variation from which selection can choose, and then the possible paths evolution will take. This is in fact similar to what is done in quantitative genetics, but without having to assume that there is a simple relationship between genotype and phenotype. A third advantage of generative arguments is that they provide a capacity to understand the evolution of generative processes themselves that is not possible from classical evolutionary theory. For that, one should use the generative and selective arguments, but apply to generative processes themselves. One should ask, which generative process variants can arise from existing ones by mutation, and which of them lead to actual phenotypic variation that is adaptive and thus can be indirectly selected. We actually discuss examples of studies who try that based on models of generative processes and how they relate to phenotypic variation. This way, the generative processes underlying a specific phenotype can vary, be selected, and evolve. In conclusions, we propose that overall, the inclusion of generative arguments into evolutionary theory, as done in EvoDevo, significantly improves its explanatory capacity because of the reasons we explain. In that sense, for the question of the direction of phenotypic evolution, what matters is not so much population genetics, but generative process and which phenotypic variation they produce. In that sense, too, population genetics define necessary conditions and conditions affecting the rate, but not the direction of phenotypic evolution. In that sense, EvoDevo, if extrapolated and up to 12 phenotypic levels, constitutes, we think, a more general theory than the classical neo-Darwinian synthesis and most of current evolutionary theory. So nothing too pretentious here. And that's it. Okay, thanks for listening.